Hey everyone, today we are taking a look at the GPD XD. This is GPD's latest offering to the Android gaming market and the first to replicate Nintendo's 3DS clamshell design. The only real problem I found with GPD's rendition is a slight gap in the casing, otherwise they pull off the look and feel perfectly. On the back of the console you'll find a variety of ports. These range from the micro SD port, micro USB port, mini HDMI port, and a headphone jack. There is also your L1, L2, R1 and R2 bumper buttons. One thing to note is that the bumper buttons do have a rather loud click, but it is something you get used to very quickly. I am a big fan of the thumbsticks GPD included in the console. They have a great feel to them. Here we have the game mapper, menu, power and volume buttons. The D-pad isn't great, there is no real feedback to separate each direction. At the bottom we have our start button, select button, back button and our home button. The XYBA buttons are quite nice, and having the addition of the PlayStation button icons on them as well, which is a nice addition when playing emulated games. The default firmware that comes with the GPD XD is surprisingly well done and stable, meaning you won't need to go get custom firmware just to be able to use the device properly. After a few hours of use I haven't managed to find any flaws with the base firmware. Not everyone will like the default launcher, but I think it's more than enough for most users of the device, and for those who don't like having to do too much fiddling around. For those who don't like it, don't worry, GPD have made it very easy to switch to a different launcher, by including the default Android one. My only real gripe with the firmware that comes with the GPD XD would have to be all the extra apps such as the Happy Chick software, which I will go into more later. Thankfully though, the GPD have made all the extra bloat removable, so if you don't want it, just uninstall it. Now on to the Happy Chick software. It is kind of odd that GPD chose to include it, as the software seems to be a hub for obtaining cracked Android games and ROMs for various emulators, both of which infringe upon copyright. I personally ended up uninstalling it, though I guess it does make the system easier to access for new users. Much like the JXD7800B, the GPD XD comes with its own button mapper. It doesn't seem to be as versatile as Tinkor's key mapper, but it does get the job done, even if it takes a bit more effort to move the buttons around at times. The GPD features some surprisingly decent hardware. The system, like many other Android gaming tablets, makes use of a Rockchip SoC. The one in particular for this device being the RK3288. The chip doesn't provide an awful lot of extra CPU power in comparison to the RK3188 that's included in the devices such as the JXD7800B. This chip doesn't provide an awful lot of extra CPU power in comparison to the RK3188 that's included in the devices such as the JXD7800B. However, where it does make big strides is that it uses a much more modern GPU. That GPU in particular being the ARM Mali T624, meaning the device is way more capable of playing most Android games. While the GPU isn't extremely new, it is a big improvement over the Mali 400 GPU that had begun to become extremely dated. Alongside the inclusion of the newer RK3188 chip, the GPD also included the stock standard 2GB of RAM. With all that said, the device only features a 5-inch screen, meaning despite the GPU not being modern, it should be able to render most things perfectly as it doesn't need to draw as much to the screen in comparison to 7-inch devices. The device also comes with decently sized storage, with the base model coming with 16GB of memory, and the slightly more expensive model comes with a large 32GB of memory. Though even with a large internal memory, the GPD XD's micro SD slot is capable of supporting micro SDs up to 128GB, so you'll never be hugely limited storage-wise. Testing the console out with a variety of different games and emulators, the device has proven itself to be extremely capable. With it being able to run the most intensive emulators such as the PPSSP and Drastic DS and even Mupen 64 Plus with little to no hitches, which is always a nice surprise. I hope to be able to upload a few videos of the device playing a variety of games on each emulator to give a good idea of how the device handles everything. As I mentioned before, the GPD uses a IPS capacitive 1280 by 720 5-inch panel on the device. While the panel isn't exactly terrible, it's not great either after using the JXD7800B. I'm rather iffy of it as whatever GPD used to cover the screen is highly reflective and shows finger marks extremely easily, which is not a good thing at all for a touch screen, so expect to have to wipe down the screen after using the touchscreen lots. One of the best things about GPD XD would have to be the controls. The thumbsticks are probably the best I have used on a handheld device, with GPD making use of the same thumbsticks that Sony used for the PlayStation Vita. Though I must note they are something that takes time to get used to, as these are not your ordinary thumbsticks. They work very smoothly with no real hitches, though I must note they are something that takes time to get used to, as these are not your ordinary thumbsticks and tend to be very sensitive, so expect to have to make slight movements all the time. The digital buttons and the bumper buttons both seem great. I like GPD's decision to include both the XYBA and PlayStation button icons on the digital buttons. For someone who never really used a PlayStation controller, it can be very helpful when playing an emulated PlayStation game. The only real gripe I have with any of the controls on the console is the D-pad. For starters, it is rather tiny, making it kind of annoying for people with larger hands, and secondly, I personally found it having a certain lack of feedback without there being a telltale sign of a certain direction being pressed. It's not the biggest problem, as it is a common thing with Android gaming tablets, but an improved D-pad really would have made this device king when it comes to controls. For the battery, I don't have a lot to say, despite it being extremely effective. With the JXD7800B, I had all sorts of problems with the battery meter, but the GPD XD seems pretty accurate and the device lasts as long as I claim it does. I've probably done about 6 hours of recording with the device powered on, and my battery is just sitting at 66% now, which is fantastic for a handheld device. Also, I don't know how GPD managed it, but even under pressure in some of the more intensive emulators, the device never seems to get really hot, like other devices do. We're not sure if this is due to the lower clock rate or just good design, but it is a big plus for the GPD XD. Lastly, there is a few things to note, and that is the device does not support Bluetooth. So if you wanted to use a Bluetooth controller with your device, then you're out of luck. Although I am glad to say that GPD at least got the Wi-Fi on the device right. It seems to be able to download fast without any bizarre slowdowns and random disconnections. All in all, the GPD XD is a fantastic standout device and is really a must-buy for anyone who is interested in handheld emulation or just playing Android games in general. In fact, I would have to say at the time of publishing this, the GPD XD is the king of cheap Android gaming tablets, as it provides all the power for roughly $180 US. If you want to read more about the device, read my in-depth article linked below. If you want to see more reviews, guides and much more, be sure to subscribe and check out our website below. Thank you for watching.